Good job. Because I've never seen it. Oh, you got a nice bio on your website. Do you like that?
Alrighty, thanks.
Welcome to the second session of the American Democracy Project and St. Joe County Public Library's Civic Leadership Academy. I'm Elizabeth Benyon, a professor of political science and campus director of the American Democracy Project at Indiana University South Bend. And we are delighted to be co-sponsoring this series with the library. As I mentioned last week, as educators and as information professionals, we share a commitment to an informed and engaged community. We cannot have an informed citizenry, of course, if people are basing their opinions and their political behavior on unsupported claims, as we discussed last week, or on fake news. So the American Democracy Project and the St. Joseph County Public Library partnership was actually formed when Jack Colwell contacted me to ask about whether or not I would like to be involved in a panel on fake news. And I said, oh my goodness, we're planning a civic leadership series, and we were planning a panel for that same week. So we decided, rather than hosting 2 of these in our community, we would team up, and so a beautiful partnership was born. It clearly is a topic that is of great interest to our community. The Civic Leadership Academy stems from a variety of requests that the American Democracy Project received from concerned members of our community who wanted to know how to sort through competing claims, to distinguish between fact and fiction, to avoid unwittingly spreading unsupported assertions and fake news. People were also asking us how to know what to do if you wanted to make a difference, if you were upset about a certain policy, or you wanted to propose policy change, or even a brand new policy. They asked about how to get involved in a political debate or dialogue in the community, how to contact elected officials, track legislation at the local, state, and national levels, how to engage in safe and effective protests if you felt like elected officials weren't listening to you, how to mobilize a community to solve problems directly, to really get to the root of the problem without waiting for a politician necessarily to step in or to take the lead. And so the Civic Leadership Academy was designed to address all of these requests and to provide an opportunity for members of our community to gain the knowledge and skills required to make a meaningful difference in their communities. And you can see on the purple handout that you should have received the list of all of the events in the series and the topics that we will cover each Wednesday. Now, in just a moment, I will turn the session over to our moderator, Jack Colwell. But first, a few housekeeping items. Please fill out our survey. Many of you were here last week. Fill out a new survey because that is how we're tracking your attendance. Many of you also expressed an interest in the Civic Leadership Academy certificate that we're offering to people who attend at least 4 sessions. So that is wonderful. Please make sure that you do provide us with an email address so we can get you more information and we can get all of the information we need to process those certificates at the end of the series. Even if you're not interested in the certificate, we hope that you will provide your legible name and email address. So we won't share it with other organizations, we won't spam you, we will send you reminders or any changes about this series and some updates about future events. We hold a lot of candidate forums, candidate debates, and public issue forums. So they'd all be things similar to this particular series. Now, speaking of updates, due to the popularity of the series, we've changed the location for the next 4 events. It will still be at Indiana University South Bend, but the room number, and you should have all gotten pen or pencil when you came in, is 1011 Education and Arts Building. That building is at 1002 Esther Street, and we'll send everybody an email with that information, and it will be up on our Facebook page as well. So 1011 Education and Arts, it's the auditorium. You'll find it if you find the Education and Arts Building. And you can park in the lot there on Esther Street. So it's right on the IUSB campus. If you're driving on Mishawaka, Esther is just a little side street. finally, do not worry about the announcements to check out your books. At the end of this session. There will be announcements for patrons reminding people to check out their books and that the library is closing. But we do have this space reserved until 8, and we want to use all of that time to get to all of your questions. And the library has also informed us that we will not get kicked out or arrested and hauled off in handcuffs promptly at 8 if we don't vacate the premises. So now I'm delighted to introduce you to tonight's panelists who will be able to shed some light on the seemingly ubiquitous but important topic of fake news. The bios for today's panelists are on the yellow sheet that you should have gotten when you came in tonight. And so you can learn a little bit more about people. You'll see there are also some strategies to use to shield yourself from fake news. You'll hear a lot more about those and similar strategies this evening. And a list of journalists you might want to follow on Twitter that Taylor has recommended for us. Now, the bios are there, so again, read more about people. Those of you, which is probably everybody in the room, who know Jack Colwell know that his bio is highly, highly abridged. Could obviously fill a whole book-length manuscript. He's received so many accolades and awards for his work as a journalist in our community over the years. The Making Democracy Work Award and his induction into the Indiana Journalism Hall of Fame are just two of the many honors that he's earned. Now, Jack is joined tonight by IU South Bend Communication Studies faculty Deanna Eskew and Kimberly McInerney, and by ABC 57 multimedia journalist Taylor Popolars. And as some of you know, I host a weekly TV program, Politically Speaking, which Jack and Jim Winsett hosted before me. I also have, as a political scientist, conducted interviews with hundreds of local, state, and national media outlets, and I honestly think that I've never met a bigger political junkie than Taylor. So I am delighted that he is able to join my esteemed IUSB colleagues on the panel this evening. So we do want to save that time for your questions, so I will get off the stage and turn things over to Jack. Thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Looks like we have a really nice audience tonight. Maybe. You think that you are here, but an alternative fact could be that you are not. Someone could spread fake news about an almost empty auditorium. And that alternative fact might well be believed, because a lot of fake news is. There's a lot of discussion, of course, now about fake news in the media. And there are two important impediments in that discussion. First, there is no agreed definition of fake news. And second, there is no standard definition of the media. I wrote a column recently in which I said, I hate the media, and I do. That term is used to describe everything from the New York Times to the tabloids you see at the Martin's supermarket checkout lines. Everything from network programs like 60 Minutes and Meet the Press to the rantings on Squawk Radio. Also included for many are postings on Facebook and Twitter, and even the revelations of that proverbial blogger writing in his basement in his underwear. All of this is described by many Americans as the media. All of it, for many, is a source of news. But if we're going to evaluate news, deciding whether it is reliable or false, we must evaluate where it comes from. Not all of the media is created equal. Not all news is created equal. Just as we have no agreement on the definition of the media, a term that means anything and everything and thus nothing. We have no precise definition of fake news. Well, what is fake news? As defined by Donald Trump, it is anything with which he disagrees. Yes. He may even concede it is true and still call it fake news, really. There was an example of that just recently when some pages of a past tax return were leaked. The White House agreed they were authentic. But Trump still called the report of what he had confirmed to be fake news. Now, let's be clear. There are in the mainstream news media stories that are wrong, that are misleading, that are shallow, that are slanted. Journalists are not perfect. But in virtually no case are these examples of false news. So let me try to give a definition of false news as I see it. Fake, not just things containing some bias or mistakes. Intentionally fake. I would say that fake news is something untrue, presented with full knowledge that it is a lie, and with intent to sway opinion to help or hurt some person or cause. Some of you in the audience may not like Fox News. Some of you may not like MSNBC. But they do not create fake news. They don't just make up lies. The New York Times, which certainly has a different approach than Fox News, just last week did an analysis, a critical analysis of Fox News over a 24-hour period. And the Times did find that selection and tone of stories were aimed at supporting President Trump. And we can talk about that a little later if you choose. But they did not cite anything that was fake news. But I'll tell you, there certainly is a difference between presenting opinion, even if it's biased, and knowingly reporting a lie. Indeed, professional news operations guard against reporting misinformation. Newspapers have editors demanding accuracy. Television stations have news directors also demanding accuracy. What is printed or televised is out there for all of the public to see. Mistakes can cost jobs. People can be fired, and they can bring costly slander or libel suits. Well, there was a reporter at the South Bend Tribune who was fired quite a while back for just one wrong word in a story. Okay, it was a court story, and he left out the word "not" before guilty. That is a problem. It's the only time in my career I actually heard people shouting, "Stop the presses." But there's a big difference between a professional news operation and that blogger in his basement in his underwear, without his underwear. One has editors checking for accuracy and asking questions about sources and whether information was double-checked. The other does not. One is aware that grievous mistakes can destroy a career. The other knows that wild and unproven statements can bring more followers. How about the Bowling Green massacre? You've heard about that, I imagine, most of you. Was that fake news? No, it does not fit my definition. When Kellyanne Conway cited the non-existent massacre, she was mistaken. But I don't think she was in any way attempting to convince listeners of something that she knew to be a lie. Stupid? Yes. Fake? No. But, of course, there is fake news, and it's dangerous. And I'll give you an example. There was a fake story online about a pizza restaurant in Washington that was harboring young children as sex slaves in a child abuse ring led by Hillary Clinton. It was spread on Facebook and on Twitter, and an irate man from North Carolina, believing it, drove there and fired an assault rifle. Luckily, nobody was killed. But our politics is, well, it's so nasty, and the nation is so divided that some people will believe anything at all about the other side. And that's dangerous for our democracy. It's even dangerous for folks in a pizzeria. Well, let's hear now from our panelists with their opening remarks, and then we will have panel discussion, some questions, and then we will also take your questions from the audience. Two of our panelists, Deona and Kim, are connected with the Communication Arts Department at IUSB, and certainly communications and problems therein are a part of fake news. Deona, your opening comments, please.
So I've been working with journalists and in journalism for about 6 years now. It's been my experience that most journalists never have the intention of spreading false information. Most of them really want to get the true information out there. So when did things change? How did things change? Well, they really haven't, because there's always been this perpetuation of fake news since there was news. So what we notice today really stems from the spread of that news. The digital atmosphere has made it so easy to spread information so quickly that things that normally only 5, maybe 20 people would see, we now have 5 to 20,000 people seeing in a matter of minutes. So I really try to focus on stopping that. So even if you think that, oh, that's funny, so I'm going to share it, you're still spreading that fake news. So you're spreading misleading information. I think we all have the potential to take control of this fake news and to stop its spread. And I think all we need to do is just become more aware of what's going on, and especially become more aware of what we're clicking on. Thank you.
Kim, your opening remarks on fake news, and I suspect you don't like fake news, do you?
I'm not a fan. You know, sometimes I generate my own fake news here and there, but ultimately, no, fake news is not something that we want to continue or spread, but it's important to understand how the news is generated. And for me, I come from a public relations background, which if you hear the word public relations and spin came to your mind, I promise that's not what we do. But we do try to, for lack of a better word, bait the news or set an agenda for the news or get out information for the news. And in politics, public relations and the news media are very important and very much work hand in hand. It's part of Kellyanne Conway's job to have a positive relationship with the news media, as well as Sean Spicer. And it's very important that the two work hand in hand in a very positive relationship to stop the spread of fake news, especially from a political ideology. It's also important to remember that these representatives are still representatives of that administration. So you have to remember that they too have an agenda and a framework that they have to work from. And while that agenda and framework may sometimes not resonate with you or your values or opinions, it's important that we look at where is this information coming from, what is the truth to the information, and how are different media news outlets reporting on this. So I think that'll be interesting to explore as we continue in our discussion tonight. Thanks, Jack.
Our next panelist, As you know, Taylor is a broadcast journalist with ABC 57 News, and Taylor does not ever report fake news. And Taylor, I suspect you don't like it either, do you?
Yeah, I don't. The fake news world is something that's become increasingly frustrating to me as a journalist and as a journalist on TV, because our president loves watching TV news. I think I'm a journalism purist. I'm a big nerd, and I feel that journalism exists in many facets, but the main one is to hold truth to power. And I think for as long as we have existed, power has been, those in power have been intimidated often by the truth. And that's nothing new. But one of the ways that Donald Trump is a genius is that he's a branding expert. And we saw it throughout the campaign as he named each candidate that he wanted to kind of target for a week or a month until they went away. And then we saw it as he took on his biggest enemy, his biggest competitor, which was the media. And fake news, in my mind, has become a brand that is very easy to associate with for a lot of people. People may not necessarily agree with President Trump or some of his supporters and say, oh, that story is completely untrue, or you made that up, or your sourcing is bad. But it's 2 words. It's easy to tweet, it's easy to type, it's easy to say, it's easy to remember. And where Donald Trump is a genius is that he not only infused his supporters with, build the wall, with, all of his phrases that he attached, but he made fake news something that they could say, oh, if I don't like something, then it must be fake news. And as you mentioned, a lot of the times, what's claimed as fake news is not necessarily fake news. It's misconstrued news. It may have gotten mixed up with something. But for fake news to exist, it takes a whole lot of effort, and there is a small group of people in this world who seem to thrive off of producing it. But I think that the fake news ideology really exists for people who don't like certain stories. And I think that's what we have to remember is kind of the toughest balance, is that if somebody views something as fake news, there's a reason they're resorting to that phrase and to that way of thinking. And it's very easy when the most powerful person in the country is kind of the champion of that phrase to point to, oh, I wonder where they got that thinking process from. So I think we're more so, kind of battling a brand that is being championed by the top dog in our country. And that's where it's becoming more difficult to kind of contain.
Thank you. Now, after the opening statements, I want to give some questions in general to the panel. Anybody feel free to respond, or if you don't want to respond, don't do so. If you want to get into an argument, that's okay too. I don't care. We make it entertaining. Say something false. No, don't do that. The first question that I have for the panel is, why does there seem to be such an explosion of fake news, and does it jeopardize the ability of our real news media to fulfill their role in democracy? Anybody?
Ladies first.
Sure. I'm going to build on what Taylor said. It's definitely, there's some clickbait going on. And if you don't understand what clickbait is, maybe you've heard if it bleeds, it leads. In journalism, it's very important to have the headline, and the responsible journalist has a headline that then relates to the article that you're going to be reading. But I'm sure many of you have clicked on something or opened the newspaper and seen a headline and thought, I'm going to read this. Well, that branding of, that way of representing that news is what I'm going to call, from a PR perspective, almost fake advertising. And the purpose of them doing that is for advertisers or to bring in more readers, especially if you're clicking something, advertisers are going to benefit from that. So this idea of fake news really is something that's gaining popularity in the production because it is bringing in dollars and cents with the rise of social media and how we consume our news now. Also, it's very easy to click and read just the beginning of a story and then shut it. We're starting to digest our news in very 30-second snapshots. What can I learn on Facebook, or what can I learn on Twitter, or what is the top headline running across the bottom of my screen? We're very busy these days, so we're being bombarded by this news that's just trying to get our attention in the middle of all this other news. So that idea of fake news exploding definitely has a purpose, and we tend to feed into that purpose just to meet our own needs for our own news. I mean, how many of you still sit down and read the Tribune from cover to cover? Congratulations, thank you. I'm sure the Tribune really appreciates that.
Doesn't take as long as it used to.
Does that threaten real journalism? I don't know that it actually threatens journalism. I don't know that Taylor is really worried about this fake news taking over his job. What it threatens is it threatens public opinion and how we discuss these issues. And further on in the discussion, we'll probably get to how you discuss these issues. During election time, when we had to go to Thanksgiving dinner, I wasn't thrilled about sitting with my family, who has very different opinions on things, and discussing some of these really hard issues based on what they've gathered in a very short amount of time from clickbaity type articles or what popped up on their Facebook feed. So does it threaten traditional media? Personally, I would say it doesn't. What it threatens is public discourse and public opinion. And I think the purpose of this panel tonight is to elevate that so that we can communicate with each other on a more knowledgeable basis.
Anyone else, or is that kind of covered?
I'd like to add something. Did you want to?
I just have a little something to add. So I think that the perpetuation of fake news and fake news stories and overly sensationalized news stories threatens journalists in a different way, because so many potential young journalists are now fearful of becoming a real journalist because they're afraid that they're going to be called fake news. They think that no matter what they write or what research they do, no one is going to believe them and believe that they're credible, because so much buzz is going around about how reporters are trash, they don't know what they're talking about, they just make stuff up, and it really comes from this idea of fake news. So on that, I'll turn it over to Taylor.
I am trash. No, I think I agree partially that I don't think fake news will ever completely take over or extinguish real news and real journalism, mainly because fact and truth will never disappear. They may not be the loudest voices in a particular room that you're in, but they won't disappear. I was in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. Me and my colleague traveled and spoke with a ton of, almost 24 people from Michiana who went. And at one point we were walking into a Republican congressman's gathering of his constituents from all over the country. And, you know, it was the day before the inauguration, so they were just having some food, enjoying, chatting. And literally, as my colleague and I were walking into the building, somebody was holding the door for us, and they saw that I had a camera slung over my shoulder. He was holding a microphone, and literally people just started joking like, "Oh, there's the fake news. Hi, fake news. How you doing, fake news?" And like, it was all in good humor, but it stuck with me because I was like, man, like, that's where we're at right now. And I have personally not had, you know, some awful experience where somebody has come up to me and been like, your story was completely made up, like, who do you think you are? But having people joke about it, it's not something that I go home and cry about each day, but I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, this is in people's minds. And I think because of things like social media, I'm addicted to social media. I have 2 phones, I'm on Twitter all the time. I love it in so many ways, but I hate it in so many ways, because not only is information able to travel more easy, you know, we have more access to more information than ever before, but that means we have access to fantastic journalism and almost an equal amount of either fake or horrible journalism. And people don't know how to decipher it. You know, your media diet is so important. And some people don't know, just like some people can't, you know, form a healthy diet of regular food, they don't know where to start when it comes to forming a media diet. So it becomes so easy to see that headline on Facebook, or to see that tweet that all of your friends are retweeting, or that all of your family members are sharing on Facebook, and you don't even have to read it because you're like, oh, if Uncle Jim and Aunt Robin shared it, clearly it's legitimate, they're older than me, or they read the newspaper so they must know. And that's one of the biggest problems. I'm a very literal person. I'm very detail oriented. I like reading things cover to cover or watching long form reports. And it hurts me when I'm told by either my management or by consultants where it's like, oh, you know, you have to make your story 90 seconds because you're lucky if the viewer watches for the first 30. And I know it's the same for newspaper reporters or magazine reporters where it's like, oh yeah, you know, our data is showing that they scroll down a third of the way, but then that's it. And to me, I'm like, how could somebody do that? Like, unless it's an awful story and you're really not into it, it's like, come on, you want to know what's going on. So I think that's, you know, our attention spans have shortened so much. And then you couple that with the fact that we have huge people in authority in our worlds on a daily basis telling us not to believe anything that we read or see unless they agree with it. So when you're kind of getting flooded with things and then you're kind of being pointed in a direction as you're overwhelmed, it's really, really hard to navigate. And I'm sure I'll come back to this multiple times throughout this discussion, but it is so important. I read an article just last night about, it was like a self-help article, and it was talking about the 100% rule, how we often operate at 99% for things that we want to start doing, want to stop doing, you know, people we want to pursue, that type of thing. And we always operate at 99 or 99.9%, but there's always that small percentage that we're not giving it our all, or we're second guessing it, or we're reconsidering. And it was saying you should commit in various aspects of your life to things with 100% of force. And I think we should start doing that with our media consumption. And you should say to yourself, okay, I know that I can read this newspaper, watch this news channel, turn to this person on Facebook or Twitter, and I can trust them, and I can get reliable information from them, and I won't stumble on to Breitbart or lifeset.com that I've never heard of but that the president tweets about. And then you kind of surround yourself in a factual environment, and there's really not that draw to say, oh, but I saw that one person who I know is not a journalist, but they work for that that organization. See, I almost fell for it. That organization that looks like a news organization, so maybe what they're saying is right. I think we kind of have to put blinders on in a lot of ways and kind of selectively choose based on our own intelligence. We have to give ourselves credit as intelligent human beings and say, okay, we know there are real news organizations, and yes, they may make mistakes at points, but they either retract or they make note of that mistake, or it's publicized, or it's caught by somebody else. But it's these fringe websites and bloggers and groups that aren't held to those standards that I think are taking advantage of this overwhelming of just information being thrown at us.
I wanted to comment for just a moment about something that was said about kids today and being concerned about the image they would have if they go into journalism, and that's certainly true. But I was somewhat heartened. I teach journalism at Notre Dame, and we currently are deciding on applicants who will be admitted into the journalism program. We were somewhat concerned, would any kids want to go into the journalism program? And if they did, would their parents allow it? But actually, we've had this year more applicants for the program than in any recent years. And many of them, in their applications, say they think it is very important today for journalism to be fair and accurate, and they want to be part of it and to get in there and seek the truth and report it. So I was very, very heartened. In fact, it's going to, this weekend, I got to go over some of those applications and decide which ones are not going to make it. I guess that's nice to have so many, but it's kind of heartbreaking to tell some kid, you know, they're not going to make it in the journalism program. Well, let's. We've got some other questions here. Just in general, I want to throw out for the panel. We touched a little bit on this, but specifically, how can we verify facts before spreading fake news? You hear something, it sounds true, you want to spread it yourself. As somebody said, you know, you heard from relatives or friends, and yeah, you're going to spread it. How do you find out if this is really true or if you are spreading fake news?
So I want to kind of build off of what Taylor and Deanna were saying. with our last question to ease into this question, and then I'll let the two of them rip apart how to not spread it. The spreading is really key. So as I said, a lot of our news is being consumed in very 30-second quick time snaps. And then what's happening is we read this headline or the first part of this article and we share it somehow, whether it's social media or we talk about it with a family member or a friend. And one of the theories that we talk a lot about in communication studies is that there's this magic bullet theory. And while journalism and media is very powerful, the magic bullet theory says that journalism and media, they're going to shoot out this story for you and you're absolutely going to believe it and 100% it's true. Now, how many of you feel that way, that the media has that much power over what you're doing? I hope not. We'd all be drones, right? We'd be out buying Tide or taking Celexa or whatever it is that the news is telling us to do, especially in those spots that they do on which product is better, right? So if it's not this magic bullet, well, how is this journalism getting spread? How are these news stories being spread? And there are a lot of different theories on that, and I'm not going to go into each one of them because I'm not testing you on them, although I love to put together tests, so if you want to take a test later, I can do that for you. But what all these theories are saying is that we get this information from multiple different sources, whether it's opinion leaders that we trust or whether it's family, friends, and peers that we find credible. And where are they getting this information from? And it's kind of this food chain as this information spreads, which is really important when we're thinking about the spreading of fake news. If we read a story and we spread it and one of our dear friends sees it, especially coming from whatever your background is or how they're connected to you, well, we're just perpetuating this problem. So we want to make sure that we're being responsible in our news consumption. So I'm going to let the two of them tell you how to do that. You can go first this time.
Okay, thanks. So I know that in many places around the world and even in our country, there are people who don't have access to internet on a daily basis or may not have a mobile device that can get them on the internet. But for those, I would hope most of the people here have access to it in some way, whether they're coming here to the library or at home. For those of us who have access to this wonderful thing called Google, it almost seems too simple, but if there's ever a news story that I come across that I may not be sure about, I literally Google about the subject. And almost without fail, unless it's a story that is brand new breaking exclusively to that news organization and you found it within 30 seconds of them dropping it, besides that scenario, you will almost always find somebody fact-checking this big claim or supporting this big claim and saying, yes, we were able to confirm it as well. And I guess it's frustrating when you see people share things online when you know that they didn't take that 30 seconds of effort to say, oh, I Googled it, and yeah, the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, even the South Bend Tribune or ABC 57 are linking to it. You know, clearly these professionals who are supposed to be doing this and sorting through fact and fiction each day feel that this is worthy enough of publishing, you know, in their forum. So I think that's one of the biggest things, and it may sound tedious and, you know, it's like house cleaning almost, but take that extra second if you see something online before you share it to just double check it. I mean, most of the time, you know, it's that old saying, like, if it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, smells like a duck, it's probably a duck. If you're unsure of a news article or a video that you come across, do a little research to kind of support that, and you'll probably be able to find something that either, you know, supports it or knocks it down. But the other thing is, you guys, like I said earlier, you guys have to give yourself a little more credit and a little more, you know, pat yourself on the back, say, I'm not a stupid person. This really does not seem like a legitimate news source. I've never heard of, you know, this website before or this publication. You know, and maybe even say to your friends, have you heard of this before? Because we're consuming so much information each day, one of your friends may have seen a story debunking something a day ago that you missed. And then you're like, oh, I was about to share that thing on Facebook, but I'm happy you told me that. But on your own, it's just resisting that temptation, because we all, if you're all on Facebook or Twitter, you love to share things, you love to get likes on things, you love to get comments, maybe start a debate every now and then on it. We all love that interaction, and it's so easy to just click share and say, oh, now I'm going to start a conversation, or oh, this will piss somebody off. But and we've all done it, but now it holds, it has so much more weight to it, because a lot of people are not turning on their TV at 6:30 each night to watch the evening news. They're not waking up each morning and reading their paper cover to cover. So in a lot of ways, it's not a burden that I want to bestow on you guys, but you're almost, in part, delivering information to those you interact with online each day. And I have tons of friends who are in the news business and who aren't, who will share an article or share a story, and I see it and I'm like, oh, I didn't get a chance to see that yet because I've been out working all day or haven't been on my phone. It's like, let me check it out. So we're kind of becoming each other's sources of information in a lot of ways, in addition to having a bajillion news organizations throwing stuff at us. So it's really just about taking that extra step to be super, super careful. And I know I sound probably like a parent or like a teacher where I'm like, double check this, double check that. But it's so, so vital, because what you're now seeing is fake news people, organizations, companies, whatever, crafting their websites and designing them so that they look so that they imitate legitimate news organizations. The best example is there was a website, it was literally www.abcnews.com.co. And nobody, you just see ABC News, okay, there we go. And so many people were spreading content from that site, and it was legitimately a fake news organization that was made solely to profit off of people falling victim to clickbait. But it's disguised. So you really just have to take that extra step. Check the website that you're on. Look at what they're covering. Google it. It's all just kind of do that courtesy to yourself, because the last thing you want to do, nobody enjoys, unless they're intentionally doing it, nobody enjoys sharing something and realizing later that it was false or that it was incorrect or that you fell for something. Because I'm sure we've all read The Onion and we all like satire sites like that, and it's always funny to share something and trick someone. But now we can't even enjoy satire anymore, because you sit there and you're like, oh, that was satire, and someone's like, no, that was made by this person who's profiting off of you falling for it, and your uncle just believed it and shared it on his Facebook. So just triple check yourself.
I'm going to direct this next question actually to you, so, okay. Unless you really want to jump in with something quickly,
no,
go ahead. With the mention of The Onion and satire, I'm going to jump to a question here that I really want to get to. It's something that's kind of dear to my heart. We've talked, of course, about what is or isn't fake news, and satire, of course, is not. It's not intended to mislead. It's really to lead through ridicule to understanding of how ridiculous something is. But it can be misunderstood, and every time I've written satire, and I love to write it in columns, there's somebody somewhere who takes it literally, and they're really mad about it. My favorite example involving satire was something I wrote back quite a few years ago. In fact, it was back when Lou Holtz was the Notre Dame football coach. Notre Dame won 23 games in a row. Yes, there was a time when Notre Dame actually won 23 games in a row. But then they lost to Miami. And believe it or not, there were some fans who were denouncing Holtz. And I thought that was ridiculous. So I wrote some satire about it. And I said, Lou Holtz has to go. Sure, Notre Dame had a 23-game win streak before the Irish lost to Miami, so what? That's only 23-1. A winning percentage over 24 games of only .958. Well, that's not good enough. What if he stays in a rut and loses one game every 2 years? Disgraceful. Who wants to be called a loser every other year? Well, just to make sure, and I think you should do this in satire, just to make sure everybody knew this was satire, I added things like, why can't Lou do better? Look at the sound program he inherited from Jerry Faust. Well, a lady wrote to the editor. I still have that letter. I looked it up last night to quote from it. She wrote, How could you allow a disgraceful article like Jack Colwell's? How could you permit one man, if he is a man, to slander an outstanding person like Lou Holtz? To compare him with a no-win loser like Jerry Faust really stretches the First Amendment rights. Jack Colwell is a total idiot. Okay, idiot, I could plead guilty to that. But total? No, I resented that. But, Kim, what do we do about satire? You know, somebody like this lady now sends a tweet out, sends it, you know, it goes
Jack,
viral.
I'm sitting here thinking, what if there was a comment section on there? The things that you would read these days.
So true.
So true. So, to me, what is the role of satire? And Jack definitely hit the nail on the head. It's taking real news, but it's making you really critically think about it in a way where some of you were here last week and learned about some of the fallacies that sometimes we get caught in. The slippery slope fallacy, or the ad hominem, or the straw man fallacy, where there are these claims that then take off. And satire kind of takes that time to examine these claims and say, well, is there truth to it? Or how ridiculous is this? And satire definitely plays a role in creating awareness for some of these issues. If you've watched Stephen Colbert or Jon Stewart, you've seen this play out in their shows, and it's actually made some political change. The role of satire, though, isn't to take what they're saying at face value. I mean, Lou had his faults, but I guess he was kind of the best coach we've had, right? Don't tell Brian Kelly that, although that's another story. I'm not a sports reporter. But what this does is it tells us, all right, well, let's take a look at what reality is here. And the satire can base our critical thinking and our look into what's the real story here. And it should spur more thought and more research into what's the real news, what's the real story.
Fiona, you have some thoughts on satire? I hope you like satire.
So I recently had this experience in my social media. I also have a little bit of an addiction to social media. I get the thumb injury going on. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine shared this, to me, very obvious satirical meme. Just this photo with this comment, and it showed some pictures of some older folks, and one had a beer, one had a wine glass, one had some illegal drug paraphernalia, and it said, the caption read, "We need to start drug testing old people before they get their Social Security." And I thought, I knew that this was a joke, so I went to make a comment, and I realized there was 21 comments ahead of mine from people saying how rude he was for sharing that. But when I clicked on the story, it was so obviously fake, over the top, just outrageously exaggerated. And so satire has a place, and it has a purpose to amuse us, to draw other people in. But of all those 21 comments, not one of them was, "Haha, that's so funny." I enjoy satire, but you really need to be careful who you share it with, because you might end up offending your family.
Offending people, that's kind of another question I want to get into here, because suppose a friend of yours or a family member is citing something that you know is fake, and you want to correct them, tell this friend that they're wrong. How do you do that without losing a friend?
Well,
very nicely.
Yeah.
Very nicely.
It's a slippery slope to step onto. I deal with this a lot, and because a lot of my friends, both back home from New Jersey originally, a lot of my friends from home and my friends here, know the business that I'm in, and know that I usually am a pretty reliable person to turn to kind of fact check them. but I have a few friends who criticize my industry right to my face, and they're good friends because they're honest with me. But you know, one of the tricky things is I would normally say, oh, you know, again, pull up your phone or take them to the newspaper or to the computer and show them, you know, the actual reporting that debunks what they're thinking. But now we're entering this world where some people don't believe that reporting that they're looking at. And so what I've resorted to at times is legitimately, sometimes when I have the time to, which is rare, but, you know, doing kind of the research that reporter may have done who wrote the article about it that your friend may not believe, and finding that original study or finding that original photo to say, hey, you know, Drudge Report put this picture up, but it's not accurate to what he's saying it is. And again, it takes extra work, but that's kind of the world that we've entered now, where you just need to kind of, you got to fact check your friends. And I think a true friend, even though they may be embarrassed at some point or they may be frustrated in the moment, I think down the road they may appreciate it. And, you know, it's being tough with somebody. But I think one of the worst things you could do to somebody that, you know, you may respect or you may love or care about is kind of let them go on thinking something that's false is true, or something that has been spun in a certain way is not actually, you know, is that. And it takes extra effort, and you do have to, you know, kind of tread cautiously depending on who the person is, how they react to things. But we just have so many, you know, gone are the days, while the libraries are great and still important, gone are the days that if you want access to an encyclopedia or you want access to kind of an almanac or something, you know, you're literally able to find it online if you need to. And you could literally sit there with somebody and say, hold on a second, give me 5 minutes and I'll find exactly what I'm referring to show you. And if you disagree with this organization that serves this whole sole purpose, and that, you know, the person who created it is a paid professional for that, then maybe you're a lost cause. But it's, you know, it's just about showing people that their scope may be kind of limited, and that there is kind of a bigger world out there. You know, there's more information out there, and there's always a way to show somebody if you know what they're saying is false, or they're just missing, you know, kind of the brunt of it. There is usually a way to pull up something or refer to something or send them something later that says, oh, here is that proof to show you, you know, why this isn't true. And then it's a whole nother question if they legitimately won't believe any news organizations, which is something some people are starting to do, but we could talk about that later.
I'm not quite as...
Do you have a strategy to use it?
I'm not quite as brave as Taylor is. In fact, I put a bunch of notes together tonight, and one of question 7, how to call out fake news and still keep your friends, I left blank. It's difficult. It's a very difficult... they're difficult waters to navigate. In my experience, I have found that the best thing to do is to open up dialogue with them and have them explain to you why they posted this. Can you tell me what about this article drew you in, or why do you think that what you're reading here is factual? And if you get down to the heart of the matter, you can then have that open discussion of, well, have you looked at this, or have you explored that? Or perhaps that there's an agenda or something behind this that's actually instituting why this is being posted. So for me, it's been, again, it's still tricky. It's very hard. And
there's
sometimes,
no perfect answer.
Yeah, sometimes you want to knock somebody's head against a wall, but that's the Irish in me. But what it comes down to is really opening up that dialogue and having an understanding of where they're coming from, and then redirecting and showing them where you're coming from and how the two fit together and how they're different, and coming to an understanding.
Can I add one quick thing just to bounce off of that? I'll leave. You know, we've all had those experiences where a close friend or a loved one, you know, maybe purchases a piece of clothing that doesn't either look great on them, doesn't fit properly, or whether it's a purchase or a decision, you know, maybe a relationship that they're in, and you know it's bad for them. And you sit there and you try to figure out how best to approach it. And we've all been there, and there's no perfect answer to it, but you know that because you care about that person, you want to in some way at least express your thoughts. You know, this may not be the best thing for you, or you may not be doing yourself any favors. And it may sound silly to take how people are consuming news that seriously, but I would urge you to do that. And, you know, don't pick and choose your battles, but don't let somebody just kind of live their life thinking that, you know, oh yeah, Breitbart is the place to go for information, and those are, you know, award-winning journalists, because it's just not true, and it's just going to kind of not hurt them in the long run, but it just will impact, you know, how they embrace truth and who they trust and how they consume things and how they understand the world. Because what's also crummy about these sites and publications that disregard fact is that it really shapes how people view the world. This past Saturday, I was at the Islamic Society of Michiana, and they had this fantastic open house that I covered, where it was literally just to like do away with misconceptions and to build bridges. That was like the description for the event. And I went and I was like, man, this is great. I hope it's, you know, I hope people come. And I was thinking, oh, you know, probably a group smaller than this would show up. Hundreds of people came. And it was fantastic because they have a beautiful facility if you've never been, and they had food, they had music, they had a prayer service to kind of see that. They had just discussions. They had a Q&A booth. And it was so nice to see, and I interviewed a bunch of people, and then I posted the story, and I looked on Facebook, and you could just tell probably 70% of the comments were people who didn't even click on the story, just saw the cover photo of hundreds of people sitting around in a mosque and said, oh, you know, made all these derogatory comments. And while you won't be able to change every person and every belief, you know, if you know somebody who is just kind of sheltering themselves in a world of information where it's just stuff they agree with and they'll disregard anything they disagree with, just try your best to pull them out of it, because you don't want, you know, you wouldn't want to be that way, and I'm sure you would want a loved one to reach out to you and say, hey, this, you know, you're hurting yourself. And it's so discouraging, because just that example, the people at the Islamic Society were so nice, and they literally, because of the climate that we live in on a daily basis, they literally said, let's open our doors and just show people that we are actual people. And there are so many people who don't believe that, because on a daily basis they're just reading, you know, these people are coming into our country, they want to kill us, they're all terrorists, and this is awful. And it's just not true to that extent. So, sorry, I get passionate.
I'm going to extend off your extension. So what Taylor is saying is absolutely great. I would expand on it to say that another way to call out some of this fake news or to have these discussions is to be educated on it yourself. So while you might be drawn to MSNBC over Fox News, it's important to get that balance and understand, all right, well, what is Fox News saying? And what is MSNBC saying? And where's the commonality between the two? So MSNBC obviously has a target audience that they're catering to, and Fox News has the opposite target audience that they're catering to. But somewhere in that middle is the story and the happy medium. And Jack said, it's not necessarily fake news that they're reporting, it's commentary on the news that they're reporting. So if you can understand both sides of the story, it's going to help you bridge those gaps. Because for every Breitbart, there's also a Young Turks. Or for every I forget the Republican one, the Blaze, there is Occupy Democrats. So there's a balance between the two where we have to understand that America isn't as polarized as it seems to be. And if we can find this balance between educating ourselves and educating others, then we can help to bridge some of these gaps and not start those, you know, family feuds at the Christmas table.
And just one more point, quick point, I promise. Your point about the Young Turks is great. Just reminded me, I was in Atlanta, Georgia a month ago probably for the DNC chair vote. We followed Mayor Pete. And we were on the press riser with a bunch of national organizations, local organizations, yada, yada, yada. And the Young Turks had gotten a spot front and center. And we were like jealous of them, but we were like, oh, good for them. And then throughout the whole event, this was the Democratic National Committee's winter meeting, the journalists who were working for them were literally standing up and applauding for issues that they supported. And that's great, good for them, I'm happy they're happy about it, but it just reminded me that not only do you have this on both sides, but it's now this out in the open. And it felt weird sitting there being like, oh, they clearly like that person and that idea, but it is on both sides, and often the liberal organizations don't get as much flack as the super conservative ones do, and they deserve kind of equal criticism.
I want to get to one a quick kind of general question before we get questions from the audience, and that's fake news is not new. I mean, the founding fathers didn't like each other often, and they had pamphlets telling lies about one another at times. And the nation obviously survived that. Now, maybe it took a lot longer for pamphlets to get around than it does for somebody to tweet or go on Facebook. But how serious is this? Is this something, this fake news uproar now, something that actually can threaten our democracy? Fiona, how serious is it? Is it something threatening our democracy right now as we sit here?
I think it definitely has the potential to threaten our democracy. I think that if we let this idea of fake news run our opinions, and it's not just fake news, but it's also biased news, whether we like to admit it or not. I like reading things that I agree with because it makes me feel warm and snuggly inside. Yeah, I like that. But if I only read those things that I like to read, if I only listen to the news that already tells me everything I already know, then I'm never going to get exposed to those alternate views. And so I think these, whether it's fake news or biased news or just a very one-sided view of things, can really ruin all of our true exposure to democracy.
Like Deanna said, I think it has a strong potential to threaten it down the road. You know, had you asked me, obviously I was very young at this point, but had you asked me 10 years ago and you said, oh, you know, do you think having a president one day who would stand and point at reporters and go, you are fake news, and call reporters sleaze, I'd be like, that's terrifying, and clearly that's probably a threat to maybe, if not democracy, just to journalism as a whole. We're now in that world, and it's unique. You know, based on what you were saying about the applicants for the journalism program, I could say, just as a young journalist who has a lot of friends who are reporters across the country, I also interned a few times with the networks in New York City, and not only are there more people wanting to be journalists, and they're kind of fueled by this fake news epidemic, but the journalists that are already in place are just more passionate than ever to get the story right, to hold truth to power, and you know, it's everywhere that I've either interned or worked, there's never been somebody that I've encountered who is in the role of, you know, journalism and disseminating information who has been there and said, I want to mess with that person. I want to, you know, report something that's incorrect. I want to trick them. People who actually care about journalism don't do that. I think what's more threatening right now to our democracy is how popular and mainstream and 24/7 commentary is becoming. I am a cable news addict. I don't know if I have any fellow cable news addicts out there, or if you've all just turned it off because you're frustrated. I understand, but I watch it still, and I watch all the networks so that I could kind of study it and just kind of see what they're doing. And it is so frustrating. As somebody who would love to one day work for a CNN, it's so frustrating to turn on the news every hour of the day, cable news, and just see a panel like this, just, you know, who they support this candidate, then this candidate, they're there for this issue, that issue, and they're pretty much going to disregard anything that you say because you're kind of the enemy. It's so frustrating, and I don't understand why organizations like CNN are falling for it constantly to do that. I think it's important to have both sides. I love a good debate. I love panel discussions. You know, you could tell I love to talk. But the fact of the matter is that you watch an hour of CNN or MSNBC or Fox now, and the news section of Fox, the news section of MSNBC, and it's still in an hour long, you'll maybe get 2 or 3 reports. And they have the report, and then they say, now we have our panel to react. Who cares what the panel has to say? I mean, yet for me, there's a difference from, you know, when you have and some of you may not be a fan of him, but you have a David Gergen on CNN, who is a political analyst. The guy has advised 4 different presidents of different political parties. If I was looking for somebody to kind of, analyze and provide expertise as to how a White House may be functioning, probably makes sense to turn to somebody who advised 4 presidents from different parties and is now working at Harvard, which David Gergen is doing. But besides that, I think political surrogates are some of the stupidest things existing in cable news world. And I think that we are all falling, and I have fallen for it too, where you turn on cable news and you think that what you're watching throughout that whole hour is journalism. And it's not. You have those few reports that are journalism. You have correspondents who bust their butts, and their producers and their teams and their copy editors who bust their butts each day. But then you bring on these surrogates who literally try to either build up that report or to strike down that report, and that's kind of what the bulk of the time is spent on. So I think that's more of the issue right now than fake news, even though our president is, championing fake news. And if you watch cable news or you watch a program and you want to know about somebody who's talking and you're like, oh, that's interesting what they're saying, look them up. And you'll just to learn about their background, how they got there, who they support, why they made the decisions they did. And at the very least, I don't think the cable news networks are going to take away their panels anytime soon, but you'll at least be able to go into it and say, okay, yes, that person may be saying something I agree with, but let's look at their history. Or, oh, that person said something that sounds true, but they lied 4 times last week, And thankfully, we're now in a world where media reporters exist, and covering the media is a beat within the media. And it's great to follow media reporters, media correspondents who not only track things as fact checkers, but they literally track why networks hire certain talent. They track why, for instance, Judge Napolitano was back on Fox News. It was either today or yesterday. And he still stands by his claim that his own network debunked. And there's still no proof, but the network allowed him back on. And that's kind of a big conversation in the media world of, 1, why is he back on, and is that okay? And 2, kind of what are our standards now? So I think that is directly next to the fake news problem. I don't think either are challenging democracy yet, but if we continue to normalize it, it's going to be a whole lot harder to just have actual journalism.
Taylor is right. We would never make it on cable news. Panelists, they're just too nice. They aren't hollering at each other, insulting each other.
Well, I'd like to interject a little bit hope in here, but if we want some debate, I'm going to say Taylor made me a little uncomfortable saying he was really young 10 years ago, but that's just me.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to lie.
There's our argument. I would like to interject a little hope here. One of the benefits of what is happening right now politically is there has been an influx of grassroots movements. So while journalism feels like it's under attack at this point, and we do have this fake news phenomenon going on that we're trying to tackle, you're all sitting here interested in exploring it and being advocates for real news. And we have, protests and movements and the Women's March and the Scientists' March and all these national parks creating alternative Twitter accounts. So while the media is one institution, democracy itself is all of us. And the more you're engaged and the more we see the public engaged with these grassroots movements, then I think there's a lot of hope in democracy itself.
Well, we really need to get to questions from the audience now. It's hard with the lights to see, but someone in the back there has a hand up.
Hi. My name's Felicia Driscoll, and my question is about access to information. I'm appreciating what you're talking about, but I have a fear that some information is actually disappearing from our access, like pages of governmental websites, which went down on day 1 of this new administration. The folks who've been archiving the internet had the foresight, thanks to God, to move to Canada so that they could save pages, every page ever created on the internet. Because the EPA, you go to the EPA, climate science is gone from the EPA side. So I feel like there's malice, and we all read those books, you know, Fahrenheit 451 and Big Brother books, and right? But this is important, and I feel like we're a little bit up here now. I'm like, okay, what do we do? And I'm getting nervous, with, you know, like how to support each other. Because if we really don't have access to information that's accurate, how can you make judgments? I mean, none of us really thought this was possible, and it has happened. Then we thought it won't last, and we're in day 69 or whatever it is. So I'm just saying, like, okay, don't go to sleep. Don't say we'll wait for the next administration. I just feel like I feel great urgency. This is my kid's only childhood. I feel great urgency. I love my country. So anyway, just like to talk about that.
On that note, the library would like to take away your books right now.
They will be burned in the back room, so.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
Oh, I was making a joke about the library telling you to check out your books.
Time to go.
Yeah.
And if you don't check out your books, you're going to be under arrest.
Yes.
No, just
Immediately.
They're taking them away. I absolutely feel that fear. I have a 3-year-old niece, and I'm concerned about what kind of information she's going to have access to. The great thing about the internet, or the interwebs, however you want to define them, is that while the White House is censoring some of this information that typically we've had access to, there are so many resources where we can go back and find those things. So as I mentioned, we have these grassroots movements. I don't know if you're on Twitter, but I believe every national park now has an alternative account where they're still sharing the data that they receive. Now, they might not be receiving funding for it. And this is a big problem, especially with funding under attack in the new budgets. How are we going to get this information? How are these things going to be funded? The thing is, we're going to have to start looking to alternative sources. So there are scientists out there ready to take the beat and go forward in their research. And luckily, we're surrounded by a lot of universities here in the South Bend area that are doing their own research and funding these things. So while it is dire times where things are being censored that we wish we had better access to, it's really asking us to up our game and finding these resources now. Going to these health organizations and seeing what their studies are that they're publishing, or going to these specific organizations that do study climate and finding their reports. Or the Human Resources Campaign. There are a lot of wonderful nonprofits out there that can't pick up all the work for what has been done before historically, politically, but then again, if we want to open our checkbooks and write donations for it, there is power in the people in finding and sourcing these funds to keep that information going.
I think just, and I'll make this really brief, something that you all could do on a daily basis, and it sounds so cliche, but donate to journalism schools, subscribe to a newspaper, watch your local news, donate to organizations like ProPublica. You have diehard investigative reporters in the making at journalism schools and at organizations you may not think about each day that are always in need, even before Trump, always in need of funding. And even if the government tries to censor things, with the internet, it seems that even if they take it off, it never fully disappears, and someone will be able to find it. But there are extremely passionate investigative journalists out there who I don't think will stop for anybody, and they just kind of need that support and that research. And something as simple as turning on your local news each night so that the advertisers who are paying, me to work keep paying, and subscribing to the Tribune so Jack can keep writing and others can keep writing, will keep journalism alive. And in the end, for hopefully the biggest, most important issues, will keep power in check, and will make sure that things don't get too crazy.
Additional questions from the audience on the aisle in the red. It's hard to see. I know it's a red shirt.
I'm a Navy veteran. I was a Catholic lay leader. We spent 2001 or actually 2000, we were on deployment. Our guys did a lot of Comrail events. We delivered over 10,000 books. We delivered stuff to hospitals. We worked in mainly Muslim countries. I worked with someone a press person through the Navy. And we were literally sending out thousands of press releases, trying to get people's hometown newspapers, trying to get big newspapers, trying to get people to see that we're doing good work. We're out here doing good work. I think out of 5,000 sailors, we got 2 people. They got their stuff published. September 11th happened, and after that, it changed. There's this big vacuum, and there's this idea. You talked about going to the Muslim event this weekend. Nobody ever sees that we had that before 9/11. That we had all this stuff going on. And so I guess my question to you is,
the checkout desk closes in 10 minutes. Please have your materials checked out now. Thank you.
How much of
the fake news is actually a vacuum that we weren't reporting stuff like that. If that doesn't get reported, and you don't put that in the spotlight, so people can see that the military is doing good things, that they can work together with these Muslim countries, it leaves a vacuum for the bad stories.
I think, first off, thank you for your service, and it sounds like you did incredible work. I think one of the biggest issues, and trust me, as a journalist, it's super frustrating, when the people above you make decisions about what airs, what gets published, and what doesn't. And I know, I probably speak for every journalist who's ever lived, that we all have hundreds, if not thousands, of stories or characters or people that we know who we want to get the story out there. But for some reason, in that particular moment, it's just not approved or possible or something. I think now, like one of the reasons I wanted to go to that event last Saturday, because there was other news I could have covered, but I was like, one, this will hopefully be a reassuring story, and I'm a fan of sprinkling in positive stories occasionally. I love hard news, but let me tell you, covering murders and crime and corruption every day, it gets old after a while. But I think we're in a really tough place because, especially on the local news level, you have executives who are being essentially told every day, you're not producing enough revenue, make it sexier, make it louder, make it, more catching. And sadly, some of those fantastic stories don't fit that mold. I don't want to sit here and be all defeatist and be like, so there's no luck, but I think that it's kind of an ever-waging battle that I'm sure was being fought probably at the same level pre-9/11 as is post-9/11. There are just certain things being focused on differently. But all I could say is that every time you think, oh, let me send that press release, let me email in that news tip, and then you say, oh, they probably won't see it, keep doing it because eventually somebody will. And I have faith that it will hopefully be covered if it's a legitimate story at some point, because I know I try to read every news tip that we get, every Facebook message. It may not happen immediately, but I hope it will continue to happen more. And ultimately, journalists are human beings, and we don't just want horrible news every day. We do like reassuring news that will open people's minds and perspectives. So I hope that we'll be able to figure out that balance more as time goes on.
Question here, and then you'll be next.
Can you talk about the potential for social media to be a type of news source from an on-the-ground level? I'm thinking in terms of the bloggers who are in war-torn countries, the police shootings that are caught on video, the North Dakota Access Pipeline, which was really not covered at all. Can you talk about that as a news source?
That's your specialty. Do you want to go there, or do you want me to?
Go ahead and start.
Okay, I'll start this, and then I'm going to pass it along to her. Social media is just this burgeoning thing that everyone is trying to get a hold of right now to really harness all the power that it has. With Facebook Live, the things that you can do now with communicating instantly what's happening, I don't think that at this point we really understand how to harness and make this as usable as possible. One of the problems is you're getting one perspective from a live feed, or it's not necessarily a journalist or someone who can take that capture exactly what the story is, but is rather the bystander just getting everything at one point. And then how do we take this perspective and then make it a news story? So there's a lot going on there that absolutely, I think at some point it's very much going to be grassroots journalism is going to be part of it. Now, the theory and the intellect and the practice behind journalism, though, is still really important, and that needs to catch up and merge with both of these things.
So I think part of the problem, or I guess maybe not the problem, but part of the reason why we don't see social media accounts as traditional news sources is because a lot of those social media, they just want to be a way to get the message out. They don't want to be responsible for creating or harvesting the messages specifically.
The checkout desk closes in 5 minutes. All materials must be checked out now. Thank you.
Boy, they're getting serious.
So I know recently, within the last couple months, Facebook has actually kind of stepped up their monitoring of fake news. So they at first were very hesitant because they didn't want to silence anyone's voice. They wanted to be a platform for people to say whatever they wanted to say, and they felt that if we take control, if we restrict what people can say. But then I think in response to how many people were saying, okay, you got to do something, this is getting out of control. So their solution was just to give you a little option where you can report the post as fake news, but it's a start. And I think if we get social media accounts that are trying to be news sources, we're going to lose that true essence of what is a journalist, and that's presenting all different sides to be unbiased.
I promised the gentleman in the front row here.
I just have a little quarrel, first of all, with the idea of a platform like Facebook, and for that matter, in a way, a platform like the Tribune or any of the newspapers that are really beholding fundamentally to stockholders. All right, so you got a stockholder pressure. The other problem is the Tribune this morning had 6 pages in the front page, and then counting the USA Today, there were 3 pages in the USA Today section. That was the whole news. Now, the South Bend Tribune used to be as big as the New York Times on Friday. You know, I counted 40 pages in the Times. I get the Times on Friday. How are we to find out about things like the Middle East? You know, where you really need a large concentration of stories on what's happening in Syria and Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan, and you've got. How are we going to pay for that without resorting to people who have an axe to grind?
Now, let me try to answer that. It's a very difficult situation. It's not just the South Bend Tribune. In fact, there are a lot of cities where papers are only printing 3 or 4 days a week, or some are just going online. They aren't even delivering a printed product. So it's a very difficult time for newspapers, and even the large newspapers that used to have bureaus overseas all around the world, they've cut back. They don't have bureaus anymore. It is a difficult financial problem for newspapers, for television stations, for all of the news media. And we keep thinking that there's going to be some way that they can enhance revenue with their online products. Thus far, it has not happened, but I agree with you that it is a very, very difficult situation, and it's very troubling. Well, before they do bring the police in and handcuff us and haul us out, I hate to say this, but our time for this program is up. But there are going to be additional programs in this series. And Elizabeth, would you like to just at the close here tell them about that?
I think if we wanted to go all the way to 8, so they won't kick us out, so you can get at least one more question,
all right.
And then I'll close
Okay.
the program with a few housekeeping announcements.
You're sure they won't bring handcuffs?
I brought a promise.
Okay. Another question.
He's had his hand up.
It's hard to see. I see a hand waving. Okay.
I kind of wanted to piggyback on the lady in the back who was talking about how information was disappearing, as the transition came after the election. I was going to ask those of you who are involved in journalism or have been or teaching it. I tended to notice that even at the local level, it seems like getting basic information now requires a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request from the city for basic information. Have you noticed, I will speak to the gentleman over here, have you noticed that being an increase? It's almost like it's harder and harder to get information that's supposed to be public, and it's supposed to be transparent, but you have to file a request.
Yeah, I'll give this a second.
May I have your attention, please? The library closes in 5 minutes. Please prepare to leave by the front exit. Thank you.
So I've been with ABC 57 for 1.5 years. So, and before that, I was in college. So I don't want to sit here and say 8 years ago FOIAs were much like, I am seeing, at least in my experiences, it seems like there's more information that you have to FOIA for. It's tricky because I like the idea of FOIAs because, we do end up getting the information. It usually takes way too long, but we do get it. And I'm kind of in the camp where even if it takes time at this point, if we could still gain access to it, then I'm okay with it. I think as kind of just our society as a whole continues to become a bit more paranoid about truth and about journalism and about, sincerity of reporters, we probably will see kind of maybe a heightened alert about, oh, should this information be readily available? Maybe we should add another gate to that or another barrier to that. I hope it doesn't turn into that, but I wouldn't be surprised about it. And I guess the thing that I could say is that even if there are those barriers and they continue to kind of be layered on, news organizations will still work to get that information. It will just probably lengthen the process, but I know people who have FOIA'd for things and they get it, months later or 1 year later, and it sucks in a lot of ways, but they still get their hands on it. And usually if you're unable to get some type of information, even through a Freedom of Information Act request, then that's probably shady, and it leads you to report on it further. So I don't think there's like an epidemic where it's like, oh, I used to be able to walk into the police department and look at the police logs, and now I can't. We could still, well, at least here in South Bend, you're able to go check the police.
Here in South Bend, we don't get information we ask for.
In what regard?
In a lot of regards.
Mm-hmm.
And we're being pushed off with FOIAs until it's no longer, the subject's no longer relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is not transparent. And the minutes are not formalized.
Mm-hmm. I do know that if you do go down to the police department, you can check the logs. They are available. I'm sure Jack could speak to, in your experience in your years here, kind of how the FOIA process has maybe changed, if it has changed in your experience.
Well, I think there's a lot more reliance on it now. In fact, I'm not sure when that actually came into existence, when you could file and seek information like that. It wasn't always that way. I don't know that places are any more secretive than they were 20 years ago or 40 years ago. One thing that I think has changed is that there was a little more of a convivial attitude between the reporters and the public officials, where they would sit down, have coffee, and talk more openly about things. Now they seem to be very afraid to do that, and so they have come to the point where they're just not going to say anything unless you do file suit and try to get the information that way. I guess, should we kind of close now? Elizabeth, of course, is the architect of tonight and all of this whole thing.
Yes, please join me in thanking the panelists and our moderator. And please do remember remember to complete the survey. Let us know who you are, what other sessions you plan to attend, if you would like to get the certificate, all of that. If you don't have a pen or pencil, you can just raise your hand, and a student from the Political Science Club will bring one to you. You can just give that to one of our volunteers as you leave, or even leave it on your seat and they will collect those. Be sure to check the box to join our email list. Another great way to stay up to date is to like the library page and to like the IU South Bend American Democracy Project on Facebook. Speaking of social media, we want to thank you for coming this evening, and we hope to see you at the IU South Bend campus next Wednesday in the Education and Arts Building, first floor auditorium. You can park in that Esther Street lot, so it'll be nice and convenient. We'll give you all the best tips and tricks on how to talk with local, state, and national politicians who are making decisions that matter to you and your family and your community. And Pam, you wanted to announce something really quickly. I guess you had asked before the session. Go ahead.
The library is now closed. Please leave by the front exit. Thank you.
I mentioned this last week. I wanted to be sure, if you're new to this series, that you knew that there was going to be a moderated town hall on healthcare. And it's being promoted by the Northern Indiana Community Coalition for Healthcare and the Community Wellness Partners. It will be Sunday, April 9th from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Century Center, with or without Congresswoman Walorski. I think our need personally to have a discussion on healthcare is even more critical now, because with the recent non-vote of Trump's plan, it means bipartisanship is very needed to craft something. So I think it's even more important to engage Jackie in a discussion of healthcare, whether or not she is there or not. Please call her office, ask her to be there. I have flyers, if you'd like a flyer, take one, but pass them on, share it with people so that we have lots of people there. And if you wish to make your own comment about how the Affordable Health Care Act has benefited you, they do want stories. So please consider if you've had a good experience or a bad experience.
So on that note, I will say, having interviewed Representative Walorski several times, that she is not able, she won't be at our event next week, but her field director for the district, who's also her general counsel, will be there as we talk about how you contact elected officials and different ways to approach different officials. And so you certainly will have an opportunity to talk to him at that event, along with other local, state. We're trying to get representation from local, state, and national levels. For people to talk to you about.
To that real quick?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. I'll actually be moderating that town hall. And I just know I am also trying to reach out to the Congresswoman and have been unsuccessful so far. I am in touch with her people often for things. But please come out either way, because it's always great to have a discussion.
Okay, so I'd like to thank our partners at the St. Joseph County Public Library and the volunteers with the IUSB Political Science Club, especially President Andy Trowbridge and Vice President Rhonda Redman, and Rhonda's daughters, who are all here volunteering this evening. And I want to thank all of you for coming out. I think our panelists would be happy. I know there were a few of you who didn't get your questions answered to just come up and chat for a couple minutes. We hope to see you again next week. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's all of you who will make our community great. So thank you so much.
Nice job, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.